Hey church, welcome and thank you for worshiping with us. Wherever you're worshiping, in your home or on your TV, laptop or phone, you are a part of this family. And you could watch or listen to past messages by heading to mycornerstone.family. On our sermons page, you can view playlists, search for past messages, and more. You can even listen to our content by subscribing to the Cornerstone America's podcast, which can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. I hope you enjoy the message and thank you for being a part of the Cornerstone family.
All right, let's jump into our text this morning. We're talking about a seat at the table. We're talking about He's made room for us. He's invited us to His table. And today I don't want to talk about Palm Sunday. Interestingly enough, as I did last year, I talked about Palm Sunday, about how He walked into Jerusalem and what He did that day. I want to talk about the night before Palm Sunday, Saturday, and what he did. He sat at a table with some of his closest friends to fellowship before he would head to Jerusalem and go to the cross. There are about 17 different accounts of Jesus having dinner with people in the Gospels. All of them very interesting. This one maybe being one of the most interesting, of course, besides the Last Supper. But this was a very meaningful dinner that he had with friends. Lazarus, Mary, and Martha were there. Lazarus had just been raised from the dead. He's going to the cross. He knows what's about to happen, and he takes time to spend time with some of his closest friends. Here's the thing about the table. This isn't just their table. I think it's also our table. And we're going to go into the Gospel of John for this account, although it's also in Mark and Luke. Here's the thing about John's account. John doesn't just give us the event. What's interesting about John, he's all about individuals. If you read through his gospel, he's about individuals and looking at their individual lives. And one of the things that John does at this table, at this dinner that Jesus was at, was that he looks at the motivation of what was going on in each person's heart that was there. And so he really gives us an insight into this. So this table reveals 4 conditions of the human heart that we all deal with. At this table, Jesus doesn't just reveal their hearts. I think he also reveals our heart. So the question isn't, who do you see in the story? The question is, where do you see yourself at the table as we go through this? Is our heart surrendered? Like we'll see Mary's heart is surrendered. Is it like Judas's? It's struggling with selfishness. Or is it like the crowd who is just curious, just came to look and to listen? Or is it fearful like the religious leaders were? So as we go through the story, let's not think about just those who were there, but how it also represents our heart in the story. Let's go to John chapter 12, verse 1. We'll start here. 6 days before Passover, 6 days, so it's right before Palm Sunday, Jesus came to Bethany where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Now what's interesting is in the previous chapter, John chapter 11, we have the story of Lazarus being raised from the dead. John doesn't really have to remind us of that. We would have just read it if we're going through it chapter by chapter. But he does to make a point. He doesn't want us to lose sight of this, that it's Lazarus, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. He wants to make sure that point is in our mind. He wants us to make sure that the point 6 days before the Passover, this is not random, this is the countdown. 6 days until the cross, 6 days until nails, spikes are put in through his hands and his feet. 6 days until the crowd turns on him. One moment they're saying, hail him, hail him. The next minute they're saying, nail him, and he gives his life for us. Jesus knows exactly what is coming. He's not going into hiding. He's going to sit down with some of his closest friends. He's in Bethany. This is not Jerusalem. It's about 2 miles outside of Jerusalem, not in the spotlight, not in a platform, small town with some of his closest friends. It's very interesting what Jesus chooses to do in this last week. If you had 1 week left to live, what would you do? What would you spend your time doing? This is what Jesus did. If we just take a little synopsis of just prior to this, John chapter 10, verse 40, he went back to the Jordan River where John had been baptizing, where Jesus himself had been baptized. I find this interesting that right before his last week, he goes back to where his ministry started. Where do you need to return to be refreshed spiritually? Where do you need to return to maybe connect afresh and anew with God? Jesus went back to the Jordan River. He also went back to heal Lazarus. In John chapter 11, he goes and he heals Lazarus. He raises him from the dead. What's also interesting is he withdrew to the desert with his disciples in John chapter 11, verse 54, I think in preparation for this last week. He wanted to make sure that he got away from the crowds and got with his Father. And we see him here in John chapter 12, verse 2, spending time with his closest friends. Might consider them family, wanting to be with those that were closest to him. Isn't that what we would do? If we had a week left, we'd be spending with those that we are closest to. He went to where Lazarus lived, whom he had raised from the dead. The tension is here. You don't see it on the surface. Everything seems calm as they're going to have this meal, but underneath there is a tension that is escalating. We'll see this as we get into the text. As people's hearts are revealed. Jesus is in the room, and he doesn't just receive worship, he reveals hearts. Let's jump into verse 2. Here a dinner was given in Jesus's honor. This is the whole purpose for the meal, is to honor Jesus, probably for raising Lazarus from the dead. So Lazarus, Martha, Mary have this dinner for him in his honor. Martha served while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. So we have this celebration meal, this celebration dinner of gratitude and honor. Martha was serving. We know Martha had served earlier we see this in Luke chapter 10. She had been busy but distracted. She was upset, and she talks to Jesus about, tell my sister to get up and help me, and Jesus doesn't do that. But here we have Martha serving, and Jesus isn't upset about it. She was serving worshipfully. She was serving with the right heart and the right attitude, and she was worshiping. I think she was really worshiping God through her service. So there's no need for correction, no rebuke. She's faithfully serving. Lazarus is reclining at the table. I think this is powerful. He's not in the tomb. He's at the table. Not just at the table, but he's reclining. He's resting. He's belonging. He's in an intimate setting with Jesus. As they're around the table, they weren't sitting on chairs. They were most likely sitting on the ground and would recline onto the table. And they were talking and fellowshipping and resting and belonging. This is huge because as Jesus is getting ready to go to the cross, this man Lazarus was dead. He had been buried. He had been mourned for. But now he's alive and he's present and he's at ease with Jesus. Reclining at the table is about relationship. It's about acceptance. It's about fellowship. It's about relationship. It's about belonging. And this is what we see going on here. These people, I think these three people, Lazarus, Martha, Mary, all were worshiping through what they were doing. Martha worshiping God through her serving. I think she was showing her love for God through her serving. Lazarus, I think, was worshiping through his fellowship as he's reclining at the table. Maybe we don't think about this much, but I think the way they were reclining, the way they were sitting and talking and fellowshipping, I think that was a part of his worship, his love for Jesus. He's there with Jesus and they're talking. What we're going to see in the next verse, we're going to see Mary worshiping and loving God through giving, extravagant giving. You're probably familiar with this story. I think all are valid. All these types of worship, all are different, all necessary and needed. Each one in this moment, I think, serving God, loving God through what they were doing. Look at verse 3. I think the first heart that we see revealed here is the surrendered heart. Verse 3, then Mary took a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet, wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of that perfume. So she took a pint of pure nard. This is a very costly perfume. It would take about a year's wages to buy this. It wasn't something that was sold local, it had to be imported, probably from India. And so she had probably saved up money, she had purchased this. I imagine as she's there around the table, probably not sitting at the table, as women probably didn't sit at the table, they were helping serve and do other things. She's thinking about how she could worship Jesus, how she could show her love for him and generosity, and she grabs this perfume. and she begins to anoint Jesus with it. She took this expensive perfume, she poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. I think showing her humility. I think worship takes us low, it humbles us. Feet were dirty, dusty, usually washed by servants. And sometimes we think our feet are gross, but their feet were really gross. You know what I mean? Wearing sandals all day long with dirt, dusty roads, and all the debris and junk on the road, and their feet are filthy. And she takes this very costly perfume, pours it out. Other gospels say she breaks it, not to be used again, pours out all of it, and washes his feet with her hair, letting her hair down in public, which she wouldn't do as a Jewish woman. Lets her hair down. Humility. In that culture, a woman's hair was her glory, her dignity, her identity. She uses her glory to serve Jesus' glory. This was socially risky to give herself, to pour this out and to give herself to Jesus in this way. And the house was filled with the fragrance. Jesus' clothes, I'm sure, were filled with the fragrance. Here's the thing, our worship impacts those around us. You think about how this got on his clothes, how this was on him, how it not only filled the room, but probably everywhere he went for that week. The next day, as he rides in on a colt into Jerusalem, the perfume, the smell is probably still on him. As he goes into trial after trial after trial, the smell still on him. As the soldiers are bartering for his clothes, that smell still on there. She anointed him for burial. Mary's worship was costly. It cost her something, about a year's wage. It humbled her. It brought her low. It was personal. It involved her identity. She let down her hair and washed his feet. It was complete. She poured out everything. She gave all that she had. And it was impactful. It filled the room. This is Mary worshiping Jesus. Can you imagine what was going through her mind as she did this? What would others think? What would others say? But it doesn't bother her. She worships Jesus. The story goes on in verse 4, but one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief as a keeper of the money bag. He used to help himself to what was put in it. Going back to verse 4 here, it starts with but. The moment shifts from this worship to this moment, this objection. And it's coming from a disciple. It's not coming from an outsider. It's not coming from somebody in the crowd. It's coming from a disciple, one of those closest to Jesus. You know, proximity to Jesus doesn't guarantee surrender. He says, why wasn't this sold and given to the poor? As if he cared about the poor. He didn't really care about the poor. Of course, we wouldn't have known this if John wouldn't have given us the insight that he was a thief and that he was taking money out of it. And what we see, the heart that's revealed here at this dinner table, is that Judas had a selfish heart. He wanted the money. If you go back to some of the other gospels, what happens right after this event is Judas goes to the religious leaders and talks about how he can betray Jesus. I wonder if this upset him, that Jesus didn't think the same way as Judas did on this. And so he went to the leaders like, hey, let me get some money a different way. I will bring him to you. What will you give me? How much will you pay me? Mary pours out. Judas calls it waste. A selfish heart criticizes what it doesn't understand. It justifies itself in spiritual language, which he did. I mean, what he said made sense. Why waste this? We could keep this and give it to the poor. It made sense. But hidden sin has a way of separating us from God. Hidden sin, while appearing close to God, separates us from God. Judas didn't reject Jesus publicly at first. He rejected him privately. Let's go to verse 7. Look at Jesus' response. He said, leave her alone. Jesus replied, it was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. He's saying, leave her alone. Leave her alone. What she did was prophetic and what was about to happen. Jesus calls it appropriate. It was intended for his burial, for his preparation. This is huge. Why all these people didn't see what was about to happen, Mary had some sort of glimpse into it. The others don't understand, but she understands and does this prophetic act to Jesus. What this reveals about Mary, I think Mary had a surrendered heart as she does this. Judas has a selfish heart. But we go on. Look what verse 9. Meanwhile, a large crowd of Jews found out that Jesus was there and came, not only because of him, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. Here we have, I think, the curious heart for those coming in the crowd. They were coming to see Jesus. Yeah, they wanted to see him. They also wanted to see Lazarus because he had been raised from the dead. Maybe they were wondering, what does a dead man look like? What does a man look like who had been raised from the dead? I mean, we could imagine like maybe they thought it'd be something like The Walking Dead. Maybe he was walking around, maybe his skin was turned colors or something. They were curious to see Jesus, curious to see Lazarus. This is the curious heart. The curious heart misses it because it's not committed to anything. It's just curious, just wanting to look, just wanting to watch, but not committed. Divided motives. Today, some people like to do the same thing. They like to sit and watch. Not committed, just curious, just listening, just looking. Wanting to see maybe something supernatural, something different, wanting to just look. Wanting to hear Lazarus' testimony. He doesn't say anything, but his life sure is a huge testimony. I don't think he had to say anything. He didn't have to preach anything. His life said it all. Let's keep going. We have the curious heart. How about the fearful heart? Verse 10 and 11. So the chief priests made plans to kill Lazarus as well. So the chief priests made plans to kill Lazarus. They wanted to kill Jesus. They also wanted to kill Lazarus. They wanted to get rid of both. They wanted to get rid of Jesus and they wanted to get rid of Lazarus. So the chief priests made plans to kill Lazarus as well. For on account of him, many of the Jews were going over to Jesus and believing in him. I think these religious leaders had a fearful heart. Afraid to let go, afraid to surrender, afraid to let go of the control that they had. What holds our heart fearful? Are we ever afraid to surrender, to give God what he's been asking us to give him? Let's keep going with our text. If you go to my next slide, here's what happens. Mary pours out everything. She is surrendered. We have Judas that pushes back. He's selfish and tries to hold on to things that he thinks should belong to him. You have the crowd that just watches. They are curious. They're not committed. They're just curious. They're just watching and listening. And then you have the leaders that are fearful and plot to kill Jesus and to kill Lazarus. Let me go to my next slide. What heart do you have this morning? Or maybe there's a multiplicity going on in your heart this morning. Do you have a surrendered heart like Mary that you're willing to pour it out, give God everything, holding nothing back? Do you have a surrendered heart this morning? Do you have a selfish heart? I think sometimes we vacillate between surrendered and selfish, don't we? We struggle this from maybe day to day or decision to decision. Are we surrendered or are we selfish? Wanting to hold on, wanting to have control. Or maybe we're curious. Maybe we really haven't committed. We're just curious. We're just watching from a distance. We're listening, looking on, but really not entering it in, not really surrendering our life to him. Or do we have a fearful heart? Are we afraid? Are we afraid of losing control? Are we afraid of what we might lose? Are we afraid of the uncertainty. Will you stand with me this morning as we get ready to close in prayer? Just keep this slide up here for a minute. Think about yourself, your heart, your life this past week and the week to come. Which heart represents you? What would be your next step? If you can recognize yourself in one of these four hearts, maybe you're married, you have the surrendered heart. And you just need to keep pouring out your heart to Jesus. Keep going deeper. Keep your life surrendered. It's not, I wish it was a one-time decision and we didn't have to do it again, but it's a continued day after day after day, surrendering our lives moment by moment, day by day. Maybe you struggle with the selfish heart. I think many of us here, probably all of us here, struggle daily with the selfish heart. Maybe not in the same way that Judas did, but we struggle with certain moments and certain decisions, wanting to do what we want versus what God wants, maybe wanting our way over somebody else's way. What do we do when we're struggling with selfishness? Do we bring that to Jesus? Do we lay it down? Do we surrender it? Do we hold on to it? Do we keep fighting for our way? Maybe we've been believing God for something and we've been trying to make it happen in our own strength. I think that happens too. Instead of surrendering it all to Him and let God work it out the way He wants to work it out. The selfish heart. Maybe you're here, you have the curious heart. Maybe you're interested, curious, looking on from a distance, show up, listen, watch, but not fully committed. What's your next step today? And then the last one being the fearful heart. Wanting to hold on, not wanting to lose control. Next step, trust, surrender.